This week on Talking Politics USA.
This is your favorite president. I'm a big fan.
Are you not entertained?
This is red meat for his mega folks.
These young kind of blades, if you like, are coming in with no real oversight.
It's kind of embarrassing to see what's going on.
What I worry about is the threat from within.
Suddenly he's now back into what he considers superpower status.
American underwriting of European security now has a question mark.
It's almost like peace through capitulation.
We're very fond of California. It would be a brilliant addition to the Danish kingdom.
People in California probably love the idea, I'd imagine.
Can countries actually do this?
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Hygge Omar, standing in for Tom again. Regular listeners will be happy to hear that our Dan in Washington is, of course, with us this week. Dan, how are you?
Very well, very well. Nice to see you.
And you. And if you've ever listened to our award-winning podcast, Will Trump Win? And Trump Won, What Now? And if you didn't, where have you been? Then you'll be familiar with my other guest today, Laura Schwartz. Laura is a former White House Director of Events and advisor to President Bill Clinton. Laura, hello. Great to have you on the show again.
Hygge and Dan, it is just an honor to be with you and with your incredible listeners and viewers. So thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. Well, I hope you all had a great weekend. Did any of you see what Trump got up to at the weekend?
Oh, gosh, did he do anything? I can't recall. Yeah, I tell you, that man never leaves chance when it comes to making a big spectacle or a big move. Yeah, it was a big weekend, rigging.
Dan?
Yeah, it was. He doesn't really have a quiet weekend, Donald Trump, does he? I mean, talk about taking a victory lap after the election. He went down to the raceway in Daytona in Florida, where the first IndyCar race was going to get underway. Not only did he do a flyby in Air Force One, which was pretty spectacular, he then literally took a lap around the circuit in the armored car known as the Beast, and gave this message to the drivers.
This is your favorite president. I'm a big fan. I am a really big fan of you people that you do this. I don't know, but I just want you to be safe. You're talented people and you're great people and great Americans. Have a good day. Have a lot of fun, and I'll see you later.
Well, Dan, I mean, this is absolutely vintage Trump, isn't it? I'm served up for the social media age.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've read quite a lot about this as a deliberate strategy to. I mean, not only is there this strategy to sort of flood the zone and never leave any news cycle without about 5 different stories in it, but apparently also the strategy seems to be not to leave any weekend with about 5 different stories. But there's more to this as well, and maybe Laura can talk about this. There is a definite demographic that they are pursuing and going after, and I think that ties in with the crowd at these IndyCar races. They are, in the minds of Donald Trump strategists anyway, kind of absolute core MAGA supporters, they hope. And so they are pursuing them by turning up at events like this. But there's also a kind of aspect of almost like a Roman emperor turning up at the Colosseum and sort of, here are the games, are you not entertained? And giving the people what they want, perhaps as a bit of a distraction to some of the more difficult policies that are being pushed through during the rest of the week.
I mean, it was a real spectacle, Laura, but just tell us more about the NASCAR crowd and the Indy 500 sort of crowd, because that is his demographic, as Dan was saying.
Well, especially the Daytona crowd. Formula One, Indy skews a little bit more, you'd say, to the left or independent. But I tell you, this man knows how to brand, and this is red meat for his mega folks. We've seen his polling since Inauguration Day. He's always been on top when it comes to favorability over unfavorability. Right now, as of today, we're seeing a bit of a dip, almost 4 points, where now he's about 46% favorable, 48% unfavorable. And what he wants to do, and I have to say it's an incredibly smart strategy by his folks, you flood the zone. You distract from everything else that you're not addressing, like egg prices and grocery prices, from confusion, which is part of their strategy coming out of D.C., and you make a big spectacle, and that's what he wants. But to Dan's point, he really did sound more like a dictator, an authoritarian. I mean, I am your favorite president. It's over the top, but not for his core supporters.
Now, there is a huge amount to talk about today. We are, of course, going to discuss Ukraine and the meetings between the US and Russian officials in Saudi Arabia and European leaders hastily meeting in Paris. Plus, we'll be hearing about the attempts to bring Hygge to Hollywood. I will explain later. But first, we want to talk about a select group of young men who are playing a crucial role in Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, as it's called for short. They're a key part of Musk and Donald Trump's project to reshape the entire federal government. In fact, Mr. Trump was asked about them and reports that some are as young as 19. Here's what he had to say.
They're very smart, though, Peter. They're like you. They're very smart people.
Thank you. Have you met any of these guys?
No, I haven't seen them. They work actually out of the White House. They're smart people.
So smart people, Dan, but what do we know about these young men?
Well, I mean, the overwhelming thing is that they're incredibly young. One of them is only 19 years old. He's only just graduated from high school. And he is the guy, Edward Corrstein, who goes by the moniker online Big Balls. You may have picked this up in some of the commentary. He's got a lot of attention because of some of the previous controversial websites he was involved with some pretty provocative names, some quite sexualized, some pretty distasteful, that I think he's tried to distance himself from. But now, along with a coterie of other young, mostly men, has got this incredible power within the so-called Department of Government Efficiency to go delving into the books, the numbers, the data sheets, the spreadsheets of government, and to try and find things that they feel are inefficient that could be abolished. But we've been talking to a lot of people this week about some of the repercussions of all of this, and they are really profound in terms of entire government departments and aid programs that are being closed down around the world. And it's really causing ripples among the establishment here in Washington, that these young kind of blades, if you like, are coming in with no real oversight and have the authority of the president under Elon Musk to go in and start slashing and burning, laying off federal workers, freezing budgets and closing down entire departments.
Now, Laura, you've got personal experience of being very young, working in D.C. I think I'm right in saying that you were the youngest female presidential appointee in history. Is that right?
Yes, I started volunteering when I was 19 and hired on at 20 years old. So, yeah, very young, but, distinct differences. It's interesting. Dan gave us a great background, especially within congressional oversight. I would just add, too, it's the lack of transparency as to who these people are and what they're doing completely. Government oversight. Trimming down the government is nothing new. And in fact, it's something that should be welcomed. There is fraud in government. There is overspending in government. It deserves to be looked at. And the majority of Americans, and Republicans and Democrats alike, agree on that. They are going in rather than a scalpel with just a machete and cutting and sending notes to lay people off. In fact, they fired the nuclear safety workers last week with apparently not knowing, and now they're trying to get them back, but they have to find out how to contact them. So, there's a good side to this, but there's a bad side to this process. Dan mentioned one guy. There's another guy, 25 years old, Marco Ilez. They found out he posted, "I was racist before it was cool. You could not pay me to marry outside my ethnicity," and normalize Indian hate. So when this came out, he resigned. And then there was this big campaign by the Vice President, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk to go ahead and reinstate this guy.
I'm just wondering, what
Laura,
was it
if I
like,
could-
though, when you were 19 to step into the White House and be given such, responsibility? Did you fear it, or were you excited?
I felt the weight of the responsibility because I saw those around me taking it so very seriously. Because you don't just represent the White House as a piece of government. You don't just represent the administration, representing the American people. But, what you do and say reflects. And what you want to make sure is that once you come into government, you're working for all people. It's kind of embarrassing to see what's going on because I know the White House as well-functioning, as well-meaning. I mean, I wasn't part of the Bush administration. I was part of the Clinton administration, right? But we wanted to make sure that President Bush was set up for success because it's bigger than you.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually in the White House press office a couple of days ago. And, one thing that struck me is how young the staff are. I mean, they are all really in their early 20s. I guess that maybe, Laura, that's normal that, the sort of junior staff, they're probably not paid very much, but it's still a pretty prestigious job. But one thing with these Doge guys is it's not just that they're young, but there are links. Some of them have to hacking networks, for example. Some of them have links to websites that are registered in Russia and China. So there are real security questions to ask about them.
Mm-hmm. And you're so right, Dan. And let's remember, like, even if there's a bunch of 20-year-olds running around, the White House press office, the big deal is respect. Respect for the press. And because as a member of the press office, as I was, you are, yes, responsible, to the White House and the administration every day. But you want to make sure you're there for a reason. You're a conduit to the press. You're a conduit to the American people. You want to make sure that you are giving accurate information and in a way everyone can understand and really involve people into the process. And this just seems to be going the other way. It's to create chaos. It's to create disarray. And so far, with that being their goal, they're succeeding.
Being devil's advocate, I suppose Trump's people would say, look, what they're doing is popular with the American people. You ask any American voter around the country, should we cut waste? Is there fat to trim off the personnel list in Washington? You get a resounding yes. So a lot of this stuff is fundamentally popular about sort of cutting waste, draining the swamp, as they put it very provocatively. But the idea of, over-bloated government that needs trimming down is popular. I guess it's the way that they are doing this that is controversial.
Okay,
right.
thanks.
And something President Clinton always taught me is that, Laura, it's not just what you do, it's how you do it. And that's exactly it, Dan. People poll well about what they want to have happen. But then when they're seeing how it happens, this is where we're starting to see the dip in the poll. I don't think it's going to be super significant, but you're seeing reaction.
We're doing the talking, but we want you to ask the questions. So email talkingpolitics@itv.com to make sure we're focusing on what matters most to you. We need to talk about Ukraine now and the prospects of an end to its war with Russia. Now, this is an incredibly fast-moving story. We're recording this on Monday afternoon in the UK. Who knows what will have happened by this time tomorrow? American and Russian officials have flown into Saudi Arabia to hold initial talks on ending the war, although Ukraine is notably not involved in these initial discussions, and neither are European powers, with some leaders gathering for a hastily arranged summit in Paris to work out what they do next. Also in Paris is ITV News' Europe editor, James Mates, and I spoke to him a little earlier and started by asking him whether it would be fair to say there is genuine, deep concern amongst European leaders about the course the US is taking.
It would almost be an understatement, I think. What happened last Thursday and Friday has completely blown every assumption, not only about how the West sorts these issues out, but about how Trump is going to deal with these things. I mean, of course, no one expected good things in terms of transatlantic cooperation, but for them to suddenly, out of the blue, turn quite as bad as they did. I mean, you had this trifecta of first the new defense secretary saying that basically the US was not going to be the primary guarantor of European security anymore. Then before he's almost finished speaking, you have President Trump saying that without any warning or any preparation with allies, that he's spoken to Putin and that he's going to start peace talks with him, and they're going to have mutual visits to each other's capital. And then the next day, off the back of that, this extraordinary speech by the Vice President Vance, saying that the biggest threat to European security was not Russia, but internal enemies, effectively, and our own sort of denial of free speech to the European public. I mean, which was an extraordinary attack on European politics.
Well, the fact that it is such a hastily arranged conference amongst European leaders in Paris speaks volumes.
Macron stepped in and said, right, come on, guys, let's get to the Elysee and let's try and stop running around headlessly, try and get the sort of form of words response sorted out so that we don't get into some shouting match across the Atlantic, try and get some sort of European plan sorted, because as Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, said last week, it was all very well saying, you know, Europeans have got to be involved. What do we want? There isn't a European plan on this. And try and deal with the fact that Europe is not included in these talks.
But given the fact that this meeting in Riyadh between Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Minister, does not involve Europeans, does not involve Ukraine, if they come up with a peace plan, is there anything that the Europeans or Ukraine can do about it?
Ukraine can reject it, certainly, and President Zelensky has been pretty clear that he's not going to be bound by any peace plan that he's not been involved in negotiating. But were they to do that, what happens next? I mean, there will be great fear that Trump would simply say, okay, fine, well, I cut you off, you know, no more US support, you're on your own with Europe. Now, this is one of the things that European leaders have been talking about in Paris is what happens if we get to that scenario? What is Europe's capacity to keep Ukraine fighting if it wishes to, and to keep supporting it both financially and militarily and with ammunition? It would be very, very far from easy and may not even be possible.
James, I mean, you've reported from the US, you've reported from Europe over many years. Does this feel to you like a real rupture of the transatlantic alliance that has sustained Europe and America and their relationships for 70, 80 years?
The West is more than the transatlantic alliance. The West is, because it so clearly includes, you know, Japan and South Korea and countries, Australia. When we use that term, the West, what we're talking about is a way of thinking, a way of seeing the world, a way of an agreed way of operating within the rule of law and with liberal democracy. And the worry now is that what we're seeing is not just a rupture within NATO and the transatlantic alliance, but a rupture within the consensus around liberal democracy and the way that Western societies should work, that is being originated in Washington at the moment, but which also has supporters in Europe. I'm thinking particularly of places like Hungary. And that may be the big rupture, that there is this consensus that has existed ever since 1945, ever since the defeat of fascism, right through the Cold War, right through victory in the Cold War, and trying to rebuild Eastern Europe after the Cold War, that this consensus about how societies should run may be coming apart. And we may have seen the first shots in that J.D. Vance speech.
While the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
If you're Vladimir Putin sitting in the Kremlin looking out on all this, he must be popping champagne corks.
Absolutely cock-a-hoop. It's exactly what he wanted. Everyone said to him after he invaded Ukraine, look, this is totally self-defeating. NATO is now stronger than ever. It's got new members. We're more united. Everyone recognises the threat. We're now upping defence expenditure. And for a few years, that looked as if that was the case. And then suddenly we get this about face. And suddenly he's now back into what he considers superpower status, carving up the world with the United States, exactly how he thinks it ought to happen. The other people who are looking on this with some pleasure are the Chinese too, who they quite want to get involved. I mean, they keep offering to host these peace talks. They would love to see a three-way carve up of the world between Beijing, Moscow and Washington into spheres of influence in which theirs would obviously be Taiwan. Russia's would be, their old territories around Eastern Europe and the United States, the rest. It's exactly the way they see the world, and it had been thought that the West bitterly opposed that point of view and wasn't going to have anything to do with it, and we may have to rethink that now.
Now, that was James Mates talking to me a little earlier in Paris. Dan, James was talking about Donald Trump just striking almost personal deals with Putin and with President Xi, and it's almost as though they're carving up the world between them. Is that a fair reflection on Donald Trump's approach to sort of diplomacy?
I mean, he would be the first to admit he's got a pretty transactional attitude towards international affairs. What has caused a lot of consternation in Europe is this idea that America suddenly can't be relied on for Europe's defense. It is a sort of dismantling of the post-war established order that had American troops literally sitting in Europe, 100,000 of them at the moment, 35,000 of them in Germany, as a security guarantee all the way through the Cold War against Russia. And that kind of American underwriting of European security now has a question mark next to it. And I think that's got a lot of European leaders really concerned. Hence, we're having this emergency summit in Paris that James is attending there. But, there are going to be fundamental discussions in Europe about how much more they need to spend on defence. I think one of the big challenges is how do they get those troops in place? Let's assume that they agree they all need to up their defence spending, which in itself is not a given. If they do agree that they need to increase the amount they spend on defence, it's going to take years and years for this to filter through to increased numbers of aircraft, increased numbers of naval ships and increased numbers of soldiers. So there is going to be a gap opening up between the best intentions of Europe to try and rearm, to try and bolster defence spending, and potentially America saying it's America first, we're going to refocus our priorities domestically on our southern border and so on, and we are not going to be the policeman of Europe or the policeman of the world.
I mean, the word historic is overused, but this does feel like a historic pivotal moment, doesn't it, in terms of relations between the US and its key Western liberal democratic allies?
Yeah, you sort of get the impression of we're going back to the kind of age of spheres of influence, and that's sort of exemplified by Donald Trump wanting to extend his sphere of influence into places like Greenland and Panama and Canada, essentially sort of saying, right, anything over this side of the Atlantic, I'm basically saying is ours. I'm planting a metaphorical American flag in. Anything over sort of towards Russia, well, that's up to you Europeans to sort out. And it obviously then opens up discussion about, well, what happens with Taiwan in regard to China? Does this give China a green light potentially to go and try and retake Taiwan? I saw there were photos of huge big landing craft that China is building in dry docks in China. So already is that going to be something that we start to see over the next few years, that China really makes a concerted effort to retake Taiwan. But there are loads of other, thorny international issues around the world which potentially are going to be affected, from Asia to Africa to South America by America's sort of retrenchment back to much more nativist foreign policy.
Laura, do you think this really deep concern, even panic within Europe, is nudging the dial in Washington? Is anyone noticing that?
The Democrats are certainly noticing that. Some Republicans from the foreign affairs committees are noticing that. What I think is important to remember is that what America does in relationship to Ukraine is not just a very small lens. It's a very wide lens of which the world is watching, just as Dan mentioned with China and Taiwan. Right now in America, the approval for our participation in NATO still remains high at about 63%. But that's down by about 3 to 5% from last year. So this America First approach, once was America with the world, that we live on the backdrop of a globally interdependent world. What we do in America, what you do in the UK and abroad affects us all. National security, health security, we've seen that with COVID and the spread of a pandemic. So we're many people say, stronger together. Right now, there's an administration in office that believes the opposite. So they will go down the singular path as much as they can. Like you said, meeting in Saudi Arabia with the Russians and the Ukrainians don't have a seat at the table. The Europeans, the next door neighbors, like literally, and what we're hearing that perhaps Putin has ideas to go into Latvia, Lithuania, Poland next. So I think the State Department in the United States would much more, benefit from a collaborative approach, but that just is not what we're going to see from this administration. We used to talk a lot about, and especially during Reagan and other eras, there's peace through strength, right? NATO alliance, et cetera. And now it's almost like peace through capitulation. It seems that for what we saw last week at the Munich Security Conference, America's ready to say, well, Ukraine, you've just lost that land. Putin, you can go ahead and have it. And if you've got sights on other things, too, I mean, we're giving up any bargaining chips to keep you in check. So it's going to be a very bumpy ride over like these next few months. I hear the Trump administration would like to see peace in Ukraine, how they define it, by Easter, about 60-ish days away.
You're listening to Talking Politics USA. Hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now, for a change of tone for the final part of the show, because we're going to be talking about Hygge. If you don't know what that means, you're probably not alone. It's a Danish concept which is basically about creating a warm, comforting, even cozy atmosphere. Why are we talking about it? Well, some Danes have been left a little confused ever since Donald Trump said he wants to acquire Greenland, as Dan was mentioning earlier, which currently belongs to Denmark. But someone had a bright idea for a deal. What if Denmark offered to buy California from the United States? A petition, and we should say a satirical one, was set up suggesting just that and was quickly signed up by more than 250,000 people. We spoke to Kenneth Haar, one of the people behind the petition, who told us, with his tongue firmly in his cheek, what they hope to achieve.
First is to provide comic relief. So those of us who feel provoked by Trump's behavior, the way he acts in the Arctic. And second, it's about finding a way to challenge the mentality that he stands for. And we can see from the number of comments we get, the media coverage we get, the number of signatories that we've hit a nerve. So I would praise him for opening our eyes to this way of doing international politics, that buying countries should not be taken that seriously. It should be considered a simple real estate deal. What's not to like? You're not particularly fond of California. We're very fond of California. It would be a brilliant addition to the Danish kingdom. Consider this a very, very good real estate deal. It would be a win-win.
Well, Dan, as Kenneth said, this is quite the real estate deal. How can Donald Trump possibly turn it down?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, isn't it? Sell California to Denmark. I suppose we could, if we're going to start carving the world up, then let's just sell Argentina to America. In that case, there seems to be a real bromance brewing between Javier Milei, the president there, and President Trump. So you could carry on. I mean, that's kind of exactly what Donald Trump wants, I think, isn't it? A sort of carving up of the world order into spheres of influence. So maybe that's the way to go. But yeah, be interesting to see how Denmark would get on with California. They'd probably, I'd imagine, quite a lot of a good, people in California would probably love the idea, I'd imagine.
Well, the politics are pretty similar between California and Denmark, I suggest, being very left of centre. Laura, what do you think? Greenland for California, good deal?
It's all about the art of the deal we hear. Hygge, I'd love to hear from Kenneth as to how many of those 250,000 signatures were from Californians, because Dan makes a good point. I think, a lot of Californians aren't happy with the administration in Washington, D.C. Trump's never liked them. I think this is really raising a bigger issue that can countries actually do this? How many norms have been taken away from sovereignty, when it comes to Gaza Strip and all of this, right? I think it's really great that they're doing this over in Denmark to just at least bring awareness to some of the silliness, but some of the gravity of what could actually ensue.
That's just about it for this week. Dan and Laura, it's President's Day. What do you do on President's Day?
Well, President's Day is a bit lost on me because it's not a holiday in the UK, so it's a normal working day for our Washington office. President's Day, for those who don't know, is to sort of mark the birthdays, I think, of Lincoln and Washington. So it sort of falls somewhere in February. But essentially, the schools are closed, but our office is open. So for me, normal day in the office.
Okay. Laura?
Well, Hygge, up until a few moments ago, I had different plans, but now I'm thinking maybe I make a flight to Denmark. I'm just saying. I've got two big plans today. One, there's a great sale on at the local department store. So President's Day it brings mattress sales, dress sales, you name it. So I'm going to go do a little shopping. And then there's a concert over. We are the land of Lincoln here in Illinois. Abraham Lincoln is from our great state. And so there's a concert over by his state statue later today. So we'll all bundle up and go outside and have some fun.
Shopping and music. What could be better? Well, thank you both very much indeed. And thank you, Dan. Thank you, Laura. Great to speak with you both. And thank you all for listening and watching. We'll be posting new episodes of Talking Politics USA every Monday. And our UK version, Talking Politics, will be in your feed on Wednesday. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget to hit subscribe on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. For now, from all of us here on Talking Politics USA, goodbye.